Thanks for choosing to listen to this Late Night Linux Family podcast. We're only able to do this because of the people who support us. None of our shows are paywalled, but our Patreon supporters can get most episodes early and never hear any ads. Learn more at latenightlinux.com/support or support us by telling a friend or colleague about everything we do. Hello and welcome to episode 151 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Omeleth.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. Andy, your friend Pete asked you a question. Have you ever talked about what makes for a good library? It would be interesting to hear your guys' takes on it. It feels like a quite nuanced thing. A library I'm using to execute a Python file feels like you have to call specific functions from different packages in a strict order, which doesn't feel very usable. It would be cool to hear Kevin's perspective as well, given he owns that popular Rust library.
I think it's a really interesting question. I think that there's a real big difference between using some libraries and using some other libraries, and sometimes there's a difference between a framework and a library. But I wonder, Kevin, when you were designing Clap, did you have in your mind like principal ideas about what a library should be like, or were you just sort of going with the flow?
If we go back to the very beginning, no. The very beginning was like 2013, 2014, probably somewhere in that time frame. And I originally wrote that actually just as one, an excuse to learn Rust, and two, because the place that I was working at the time, we had a bunch of like small command line utilities and little things that we had to run, and I wanted to use Rust for those, but we had to mimic certain CLI patterns or whatever from other things. So I thought it was kind of a good idea to like build a library that I could use that would also help teach me Rust. So that was the original intent. However, fast forward, and I learned very quickly, like there's a lot of things to consider when you're making a library for public consumption. And a lot of things I did wrong at first, or things that like didn't really matter to me at first, and I found better ways to do them. So, this is 2014 timeframe. We're talking 12 years ago. There's a lot that's changed since then, and I've learned a whole lot on how to make libraries. But I would say the number one thing though is like, what is it that actually matters about your library? Because when we say like what makes a good library, there's all kinds of different scales of good. There's I just need it to work. There's I need it to be performant. There's I need it to be secure. There's I need it to be like pleasant to use or have a good intuitive API surface for users. There's all kinds of different metrics that we could say like, is this library good on? And some of them are opposing. So I would say number one thing is like figure out what you mean by good and which ones you want to prioritize, or at least prioritize first.
Yeah. So, Ameleth, do you have libraries that you find particularly good to use or a bit tricky to use in your work?
One immediately comes to mind as tricky, but I'm not sure I can articulate exactly what makes it tricky. It's just a weird, hard library to use.
So that's kind of top of mind at the moment for me, things like that. So a bit of backstory. I was up very late last night fighting with trying to use a library for what was supposed to be the fun open source project that I'm working on at the moment, and also making videos about on YouTube. And this video, I think, is just going in the bin, because it turned out it was just me not knowing what to do and looking confused. And eventually, actually, after going to bed, not being able to sleep, wondering about it, and then having a bit of an insight and getting up in the morning, I've actually managed to kind of force my way through to make this library do what I wanted it to do. But it felt like such a struggle. And you could say that was because it's awkward. Like you have to do stuff that I wasn't expecting to have to do to use it. Or you could say it's because there just weren't any examples. And actually, like just having some medium-sized examples, about less than a page of code that show you how to do a meaningful thing makes a massive difference to how easy it is to use a library, I think.
One of the things that I like to start with is before I write any code or any documentation or anything, I'll usually start with, let me write an example of using this thing, like, because a lot of times the things that I make are things that I want to use myself. So I'll first start off with like, let me use this library as if it already existed so I can get the API that I really want that would be ergonomic for me. And then from there, I'll try to design out how can I make that real. Now, things will change because you'll find out like, oh, that even though this is very ergonomic to do a particular way, that's just not possible due to the language or other things you need to know. But starting off with using the library first and like that public API surface is really important. But then also acknowledging that the way I think we as programmers like to divide up code or make things, or at least in the Rust community, I'm sure other communities are a little bit different. You can model ideas and problems with types in Rust a lot. that actually makes your API harder to understand up front, but also harder to use incorrectly, if that makes sense. So there's this little bit of tension where you can make your API like very hard to misuse because it just won't compile. But that can be a frustrating thing because people are like, well, I can't figure out how to get the type that I need to pass into this thing. And like, how can I get that? And with Rust specifically, I think the Rust doc tool that does all of the Rust documentation has somewhat led people down some bad paths because that documentation tool is so good that it's very simple, maybe not always easy, but it's very simple to just search for like, okay, I have a type here and I want to get this other type. Where are all the things that return that type of a type? And it leads people to think that they don't necessarily need documentation or need those examples. So I like to kind of work back from that. Like once I kind of have something I'm happy with, I will then step back and say, all right, or at least try to with fresh eyes, what would I look for first when I open up this library, and start from there and work in. And if there's too much like guilty knowledge of like, oh, I know I need this type and I know I need to bring in this other thing, then that to me says like I've probably done something wrong, or I need some really good examples like front and center to showcase how to use something. So like, there's all these different like facets that are in tension, I think.
Yeah, I do think something that is obviously true when you think about it is that the person writing a library is very close to the problem. And probably during the time they were writing that library, they had some real insights into the best way to structure the types or whatever of this thing that will mean it properly prevents you from making mistakes or constrains you to things that make sense, is this. They've had that insight, they've expressed it in code. If they then don't manage to teach that to someone who's coming along to use the library, they're going to come in with the kind of naive ideas about how it would work. So I think if a library spends a little bit of time to say the core idea you have to understand to get your head around this library is this, that would be my ideal, because there is going to be at least one core idea. And with some libraries, it's a big leap. Like the tracing library in Rust is like super complicated because it does all kinds of clever things, but getting your head around how to use it in simple ways is really hard. And then other libraries, maybe there's less of a big idea to get your head around.
And then if you also like, as the library evolves or as your development of it evolves, you have to like constantly kind of step back and look at it again. Because for example, like let's just say we had a function that was like open file, right? And you would think, what do I want to do if I want to open a file? What's a really nice ergonomic API for this? Like, well, I just pass it a path, right? Like I want to open the file and I want to pass it a path. So you start off with something like that. Well, then later on, maybe you start to support some sort of like weird line splitting or something and you like get back chunks. And so then all of a sudden you take another parameter of like line splitting style or something. And eventually someone coming new to this, like I want to open a file, like they're not going to think of, I need to pass a line splitter option, or like, what does that even mean in this context? So you kind of have to stop every once in a while and say like, are all the things here, are they natively intuitive as to like why they're here? And would someone think that they would need this for the base case? And then the answer might be like, maybe this needs to be an auxiliary function that you don't advertise up front. And it's just like, hey, if you need these other options, there are these other ways to configure the library. And there's all kinds of stuff like that like organically grows as you're like, ooh, and then I could do this. And I can make it do this. And I can give this option as well. And that can make a API surface much more complex. And I wonder if too, like Amleth, probably the library that you're using, I imagine, right? If it's one you're using, and I'm assuming probably for work or something, like it's probably decently well known, which means it probably also supports a decent number of cases, which probably means it's also decently complex, right? And I wonder if this is one of those cases where their library has just kind of grown organically to the point where like now it's complex and there's a lot of insider knowledge on like how to use this thing that they just don't explain very well.
I have a theory, TM, about why the state of the Jabber ecosystem is the way it is right now, and that involves libraries being bad and needing better libraries. But it is completely anecdotal because I didn't really get into the space. I've never built a client. I didn't get into the space until I think things started drastically picking up speed and becoming better. I think that started before I got interested in it. And I have not directly interacted with any of that. That's just the impression I've gotten.
So you mentioned bad, but just like when we talked earlier about there's different versions of good, like what do we mean by good? I'm curious what you mean by bad. Is it hard to use? Is it bad performance, bad documentation, I guess. What do you mean by bad?
With all those couches, again, and caveats and all that, XMPP is a very extensible, pluggable library with many, many, many moving pieces. My impression is that most of the libraries implement those moving pieces individually and don't necessarily have opinions about how you compose those pieces into something for an end user. And the way my co-op has started thinking about this that I really like, because of how it makes me think about all this, is differentiating between XMPP, all the protocol crap, and Jabber, the composition of all that protocol crap into something end-user focused. And it's not a direct analog, but I think a good analog is to email, in that you can hand wave away SMTP, IMAP, POP3, SPF, DANE, DKIM, all those crazy moving pieces away as email. I say email, you intuitively know that maybe you don't know all those words by name, but you know the thing that I am referring to that allows you to send an email from A to B, even though it goes through all this stuff in the middle. And it is good that email is that maybe fragmented or pluggable or piecemeal. But it's also good that there exist email libraries that let you say, I want to send an email from A to B, and don't make you learn about SMTP and IMAP and all those other crazy things. I think the XMPP and the Jabber world have not really had something like an email library quite yet. And that's needed. And I think some of those are on the way.
I think that's a really good example. And I think sometimes you do see libraries that have high-level APIs that just do the thing you want to do. And then underneath them, there's all the details if you want them, but you don't see them until you need them.
You said something in there too about an unopinionated library, or whether or not it's very opinionated. And I think that was something that stuck out to me, because I do see a lot of people say like, oh, that we want this to be an unopinionated thing. And I actually try to stray away from that a little bit, unless I'm building one of the like lowest level building blocks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then it's okay to be unopinionated, because there's probably not a lot you're doing, so there's not a lot of opinions to have. But up higher, having opinions, I think, is good. And I think you should also say what those opinions are, so that people can decide whether or not your opinions fit what their opinions are, and whether or not it's a good thing to use. And in open source, there's a little bit of that tension where like, oh, I want people to use my thing. I want to get more stars, or I want more users. So they try to be more unopinionated to appeal to a wider audience. Yet by doing that, they actually make their library harder to use, or less performant, or just like a bigger grab bag of bits, rather than the thing that is really nice and pleasant to use and firmly state their opinions up front. So I actually try to prefer the like more opinionated versions, unless I'm just all the way down at the bottom. So I like that you kind of pulled that apart between that one word.
It can also be the case that you build opinionated libraries on top of the unopinionated things. And that can be a particularly great situation where someone with opinions is composing the grab bag of other things for you.
In the Matrix world, we have an amazing library called Rumor, which is like deeply unopinionated. It basically kind of implements the Matrix spec and all the types and things that you would need. And then we have Matrix Rust SDK, which builds on top of that and is really opinionated on like, this is the way you should build a Matrix client. I mean, very similar to what you're saying, I think, Amalith. And unfortunately, in order to make a good Matrix client, there's a lot of things you need to have strong opinions on. So there's a lot in there, actually, which not everyone will necessarily agree with. But that's the right structure, I think.
Sometimes it's hard to expose the option of those opinions in that underlying grab bag, where you want to give someone the option like, hey, if you care about this, you can tweak this thing here. And that can be a difficult thing to express. And I would usually say if you want to express that kind of thing, it should be in an auxiliary type or off the beaten path a little bit, not in your main line. Here's how to use the thing with the opinions.
So I had another really bad library experience today. So that's like 2 in 24 hours, which was using some of the Android system cryptography libraries to work out how to sign some keys and verify some signatures and stuff like that. And I was in the Java world, which I don't live in much anymore. So I was back to understanding quite how bad that world was. And the documentation there is difficult. And also you can't jump to the source code because you don't always have the source code. So when you jump to the definition, you get a completely undocumented, just sort of bare bones representation of it. So then you have to go to somewhere else to find the source code. But anyway, I think the big problem with that library is you've got two things going on there. You've got people who may be experts in cryptography and have not thought much about how the pieces fit together, and also people who already know what all these words mean and know how they fit together. And if you're coming along without that perfect knowledge, and also without knowledge of the weird quirks of the way these things work, like everything seems to get created by calling class name .get instance and then passing some weird set of things in there, and then you get an instance of that class, which is not a pattern I've seen in Java before. Anyway, it was a very painful experience. But yeah, the point is that it was, I think, when the expertise of the person writing the library is not actually in writing libraries, things can get particularly difficult.
It's funny you mentioned cryptography too, because I would say like Rust struggles with that a little bit. Some of the cryptography libraries can be difficult to get into. And honestly, it's not even just a Rust thing too. Like go look at libsodium or something, and it's equally hard to be like, wait, how do I need a sealed bounding box or a sealed key for this? I need to bind it to something, but then it gives me back an auth tag. Like, what's going on here? I just want to encrypt something. How can I encrypt something? And it's funny just because like there are reasons why these things are the way they are, but it's just not intuitive when someone says, I want a cryptography library, or I want to sign something. How can I just sign something really quickly? And there's a lot of decisions you have to make. And the authors themselves may not actually be the best people to tell you what opinion you should have. Although, like, I would say they should have a default opinion. Like, if you have no opinions, use this.
Yeah. I do think when security comes into it, that adds another dimension of difficulty, right? Because sometimes the user might want to do something and you might want to prevent them from doing it because it's not the right thing to do. It would be insecure. Or it's just literally protected. So I was using a thing today which was called a private key, and I wanted the bytes of that private key, and it just gave me back a null. And the reason is I didn't actually have a private key. I had a handle into a private key that I wasn't allowed to see because it belonged to the system, not me. So it's just a good example of like security fighting against usability.
We've talked a lot about like the external portions of a library, right? Your public API and how does the user use it and things like that. But there's other dimensions to a library, such as like, how easy is it for me to maintain? How easy is it for me to add features to it? How easy is it for me to add contributors to it? All of those things, I think, are what make a good open source library. And I would say also they make a good proprietary library too, but those things are sometimes less of a concern for proprietary places. But I would argue that those are maybe like second to the public API and how it is to use. Because if your public API is terrible, then people are not going to want to use it. But having a good library internally is also an important metric, I think.
Yeah, and one important thing for allowing contributions, I think, is having a really clear idea of what your library is and what it isn't and what its approach is. So I think Rumor is just one that comes to mind for me that has a very clear approach, right? Nothing goes into Rumor until it's in the matrix spec, and when it goes in, it exactly matches the matrix spec. So everyone understands that, and if there's some bit of Rumor that doesn't match the matrix spec, then a PR will be very welcome to make it match the matrix spec. And it's just really nice and straightforward from that point of view.
I love that. There's somebody in the Rust community called Burnt Sushi that's pretty, I would say, moderately famous in there. Wrote like the regex library, was on the libraries team, wrote ripgrep. Like
I recognize them from Go.
All kinds of, yes, also very famous in the Go world too. This person is phenomenal. I really, really like this person. But I learned something from him many, many years ago. I saw that they would put in their libraries, they would put a pitch and an anti-pitch in their README, like top of the page. And I love that because it would say, this is what this is, and this is what this isn't. Like up at the top, why you should use it and why you shouldn't use it. And I've tried to copy that into things that I've made as well, and some things more successful than others. But I really like having that. Like, this is what we are, and this is also what we're clearly not.
I've heard that first part, this is what we are, before. I had not heard the anti-pitch, and I like that too.
Yeah, it's sometimes hard to write because you're trying to sell the thing almost, right? You want people to use it. And so writing like, this is why you shouldn't use it is sometimes difficult, but it also, I think, builds a little bit of trust in the authors because they'll say like, you shouldn't use this if you're looking for maximum performance, right? We make some sacrifices on performance due to usability or whatever the reason may be, but then people can look at it and be like, okay, cool. Yeah, hey, actually, either they do or don't care about that, but they know right away rather than getting frustrated and filing a ticket later on.
Yeah, I think for almost any concept, right, explaining what it is not is part of explaining what it is, right? And it just gives you a clearer idea of what it is, which is important just in an abstract way.
And this definitely doesn't just apply to libraries, right? This applies to whole projects.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's really important to get contributors and get the right kinds of contributions to say, actually, a contribution that turns this banana into an orange will not be welcome.
If you didn't want us to do that, you shouldn't have taken a mutable reference. That's what.
Yeah, and if you want us to do X, Y, and Z, but that's going to lessen security, well, no, we're a security hardened thing. We're not going to accept that.
Yeah.
And, if you want, like you said, super performance, maybe this thing isn't necessarily for you because we've concentrated purely on security.
Yeah. I just want to come back to me, like, whenever I'm trying to learn how to use a new library and deciding what library to use, if there's just a half a page example that does the thing that I'm trying to do, I'm definitely going to use your library. And like, if there isn't, or if the example does something that I don't want to do, then it's probably not the right library. But when I really struggle and fight is when it really seems to me like your library is the library that I want to use, but I can't find that half a page example, or you've pointed me at a directory full of hundreds of examples, all of which I have to click like 3 clicks to find the source code of, and then discover it wasn't what I wanted anyway.
Yeah, that's one I've found particularly difficult. Like, here's our examples directory, and it's just all kinds of stuff that you have to sift through and be like, how do I do the thing that I want to do? And that can be really, really tough. I would say, like, after the first half page of examples, this is how you use the thing from the top. This is our most important, this is what we want to show you. The very next thing below that should probably be something along the lines of assuming no prior knowledge on the subject. Because you as the library author are so close to that problem, like we've said, that it can be difficult. You're like, hey, someone showed up and they want to use my library. They already know about cryptography, right? I'm making a cryptography library. They already know what they want to use. Maybe not. They might have been pointed at your library and just know they want to encrypt something or they want to sign something. So having a small half page of documentation with an example or whatever that assumes no knowledge and can break down the easy API that you've come up with, that can be a game changer too.
Absolutely.
Again, this is not just libraries.
Yes.
So many times do I see a README for a project that just assumes a bunch of knowledge. Like, at least link to some more in-depth explanation of the basics, I think.
And also, I think if your library involves getting your head around one idea to use it effectively, that could be like an idea in the domain, like what is encryption or something, but it could also just be the key structure or class you need to know about to use this library is this one. Here's where you should start, and this is what it represents. This is the idea it represents. And once you get your head around that, everything else will make sense, something like that.
The last bit I would say is probably don't be afraid to hide the bits that people shouldn't care about or don't need to care about. And that might sound like it's counter to everything we just discussed, but there are times where as you build up this API that you like, you describe what it is, what it isn't, you have nice examples of how to use it, and even assuming no knowledge of the subject area, all these various things, you might be tempted to expose more areas than are strictly necessary. And you can always expose more later, but I would say expose less and have a smaller API surface up front, and then allow yourself to expand that later on. But going the other way around of exposing everything and then trying to tighten that back up is very, very difficult. So a library is usually, by definition, some kind of an abstraction. You're hiding the details of something. So don't be afraid to hide the details of something. Not in a malicious way, of course, but you know what I mean.
It makes a lot of sense. But I think as a library author, I think I've got to go back to what Kevin said at the beginning. Start by writing the example of how someone's going to use it, and then make that happen. And the other aspect that I would also try and bring in is also if someone is writing code and they want to unit test their code, which uses your library, how are they going to do that? And that's something that's often missed in the design of some types of library.
Yeah, I've seen people say show your tests as your examples or as part of your documentation. And while like, yes, that's the bare bones, you could do that if you have nothing else. I personally don't think that's an excuse to like not write an example or not write
definitely
some sort of documentation. Like tests are okay if there's literally nothing else, but that should not be your go-to. Another area that people might not think about is once you've made this library or have something to show, ask people to use it. Advocate for it a little bit, try and get people to try it out. That little bit of user feedback is invaluable because you who sat down and wrote the API that you like and that you want to use, while that is very important, it's also important to get somebody who doesn't know it to try it out and say like, hey, I loved it, but like, it would be really cool if it could do this, or like, why do I have to pass in this other thing? That feedback is the thing that you can kind of iterate on. And by putting it up on GitHub or wherever, like that's one way, but advocate, like don't be afraid to say, hey, try this out. Would you like to try this library? Or what I used to do way back in the day, maybe this isn't appropriate nowadays, I don't really know, but I would actually go to the clap was a command line argument parsing thing. So I would go to little binaries written in Rust and I would convert it over to using clap. And sometimes I would submit a pull request if they were open to it. But other times I would just use that as an example to say like, they're doing this with their program today. Can I do it with this library? And more often than not, the answer was no. And it was a reason for me to be like, oh, hey, here's actually some API surface I'm missing, or here's something that was really awkward for me to do in the way that I wrote it. So just like going out and trying to do it. And sometimes it was really pleasant and you could talk to the person and say like, hey, are you open to this kind of a PR? And they'd say, yes, you submit it. That's great. You get another user. But if not, like it really gave you some like internal feedback, or sometimes other people can try it out and they can give you external feedback. But that feedback loop is very important.
That's really interesting because actually one of the things that really strikes me using Clap now, many years later, is how complete it is and how it does seem to do everything I need it to do.
Which definitely is a struggle because just like we were talking about, when you have a big API surface, how do you document that? How do you showcase it? And with Clap specifically, there's multiple ways to use it.
Yeah,
and get it to do the same thing. It's by design, but it is funny. Like these things are always in tension with one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's like three different, completely separate approaches, which means really it needs like three lots of documentation.
Which we actually, if you go to some of the documentation, there is I want to do this with the builder pattern, or I want to do this with derive macros. Like there's which way do you want to approach this? And because usually, at least in Rust, people know like if I want to use the like derive macros, that means I have some macros that have to expand and it might be slower to compile, but it's much more pleasant to write. So like people are usually familiar with like what is the difference between a builder pattern or derive macros, but it is funny that there are multiple ways to do things.
Yeah. I'm a derived macros person, definitely.
Most people are. I would say that's probably the most popular, but the derived macros actually just are effectively sugar that boil down to the builder pattern anyway. So
I would just like the docs to only talk about the thing I want to do.
Exactly, yes. And all the other people that use the other one would like the same, just in the opposite direction.
Right, well, we better get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.